For those of you that know me well, you would be shocked if I told you that I read an entire book in 2 days. I do like reading. I've learned to read in the last couple of years, but I have not read a book in 2 days in my entire life, except my guest today. I read his book in 2 days because it was so good. And we can't wait to talk about it with you today. Alex Dempczak, welcome to the show.
Dude, Hampton, thanks for having me, man. Are you telling your listeners that you're a speed reader, or what are you here to tell us today?
I'm here to tell them I'm a speed reader if the book captivates me, in which your book, The Sale, did. I mean, it had me on the edge of my seat. I just wanted to know what was going to happen.
Man, well, that means a ton and is super humbling. And so, yeah, man, I'm excited to be here today because I have seen on LinkedIn, I've just heard from a lot of people about your podcast. And so, man, it's an honor to be here. And I know we're going to get into some pretty good stuff. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining me. And recently I've talked a lot about how some of my guests are closer to my age, more so in their 20s. Alex is just like really old. He just turned 30. So y'all bear with him here. No, I'm kidding. But I think he just, even hearing his story and his experiences, so much of this is going to resonate with people for a lot of different reasons. And so my goal is to talk as little as possible and just to give him the floor. And if you're watching some of this, he's got a Missouri football jersey behind him. So I'll let you start there. Did you happen to play football in college?
Yeah, man. Sorry, I didn't play at Samford, so sorry to let you down. I know you're a proud alumni of that institution, but yeah, man, it's I'm just a washed up fan now, but a little bit about my story, just for people listening that aren't familiar. And maybe you have some sports freaks that listen like I was growing up. But, for me, football was always, and sports in general was just kind of like an outlet, and it was just something that I loved doing. And so, growing up, I knew I wanted to play college football. And so I got the chance to walk on at University of Missouri. And as a walk on, like nothing's really guaranteed, right? And so you have to kind of earn it every day. And, just to long story short, going into my junior season, things were kind of like going great in life. I had no complaints. I thought I was performing at a high level. And I walk into this meeting room with one of my assistant coaches going into my junior season. And essentially, when I walk into the room, instead of one coach being there, there was three. So that was different. And then as I'm sitting down, one of the coaches is actually shutting the door behind him. And so I'm like, well, I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but this is not a good start to the meeting. And so I'm looking across the table at these three, big, tough coaches. And one of the coaches, he looks right across from me and he says, Alex, I want to shoot you straight. We have over scholarshiped at quarterback. We are bringing in someone to take your spot. Essentially, like in that moment, he's saying like, you're not good enough. Right. And so at that point in my life, like football was my identity. That's who I was. Alex, the quarterback, Alex, the football player. That's how I viewed myself. And so in that moment, it was kind of like my identity was stripped from me. And so he said, you have two options. Either number one, you're cut, like, thank you, but no, thank you. Or option number two is you can stay on as this volunteer, no pay assistant coach. And he's like, by the way, you need to decide in this meeting today what you want to do. And so, yeah, bro, as you could imagine, like my mind's racing as I'm hearing this news, like, what do I even say right now? And, all my great friends are on the team and season was a few months away. And I'm thinking, why am I here? What am I doing? And so I felt called to stay in that moment. And so I told him, I guess I'll stay on as this assistant coach, whatever that even means. And I remember walking out of the room, walking past the person who took my spot. He was excited. I obviously wasn't. And I remember just going to my truck and I remember just honestly just crying and being so humiliated, feeling like, here I am trying to pursue what I feel like I love. As a person of faith, I'm thinking, man, like God, where are you in this? I have this passion to play football, but this is what happens. And so it was tough, man. It was just a tough trial in my life. And leading up to the first practice, I was thinking, you know what? I've been with the program 2.5 years. I've kind of bought in. Maybe I'll have this big coaching role, right? Like as a junior in college, I was like all optimistic, like maybe they're going to give me this big coaching role in the team and I'll make a huge impact, right? And I walk into the practice that first day thinking like I'm going to get the free Mizzou gear. They're going to put me up in the press box. Like I'm going to do all these cool things. And one of these assistant coaches, he walks over and he's like, Alex, I want to show you what your job's going to be. And he hands me this yellow flag, and I have it to this day. And he essentially walks over and says, when someone jumps off sides in practice, we need you to take this flag and throw it down to the ground.
Mm.
And bro, the worst part about the whole thing is he like demonstrated how to do it twice. And I was
Oh,
like,
come on.
thank you, rocket scientist coach. I didn't think I could figure that one out. But anyway, long story short, man, my entire junior season, I'm sitting there throwing this darn flag. I'm printing off copies. I'm making coffee for the coaches. I'm doing all these things that I'm just like, why am I here? Like, why am I doing these things? And during that junior season, that was such a trial for me. Number one, just the sheer humility of being brought low. I now all of a sudden had this time to connect with people on the team that I never did before. I started working on my first book called Thrive You, which allowed me to get into speaking in the first place. And, long story short, I knew I wanted to get back on the team my senior year. Long story short, I did get back on the team as a quarterback my senior year. We went to the Citrus Bowl. It was an awesome experience. But the reason why I just start this podcast with that story is, number one, it just took a trial in my life. It took my identity kind of being stripped from me to fully take ownership of a lot of areas of my life. And I learned very quickly that leadership requires no title. Pursuing excellence, doing the right thing, showing up day after day. It doesn't matter where you're on the depth chart or the org chart. Like, it matters how you carry yourself. And so, man, like, I love your podcast because you're interviewing all these thought leaders. And when I think about sports and business and how it relates to being an entrepreneur, it's like I've tried to take some of these lessons, these trials that I've gone through, and apply them directly to business. And man, just to be honest, I don't believe I would be here on this podcast with you today if it wasn't for that humiliating situation in my life that I was brought through. And so I just want to encourage your listeners, man, wherever you're at, whatever trial you're facing right now, or maybe you've gone through, you never know how you'll be used in the midst of those trials.
That is an awesome story. And I love even hearing you say that you really believe that has brought you to where you are today. And this can be kind of cheesy, but the term like becoming a victor or a victim, like in that moment you could have been a victim and said, why me? Like, I've earned my spot. I've worked hard. I may not be the best player here, but why is this happening to me? And then just kind of quit the team and mope through the rest of college. But instead you, for the sake of this term, you were a victor, and you were like, I'm going to take ownership of this. I might be printing things out and dropping this yellow flag on the ground, but this is leading to an opportunity to connect with guys at a deeper level. You started Thrive You, can you tell us a little bit about Thrive You?
Yeah, man, that's a good word. And it's so true. Like in those moments, like the relationships I have with guys on the team are even closer today because I went through that, because I think a lot of them saw like, man, like he's not just going to quit, and even encouragements that people would say, just little things like, hey man, I see you. Or even had some people saying, hey, I'm praying for you. I'm thinking about you. Like, it was those comments that like got me through weeks at a time. And so, yeah, to answer your question, Thrive You was my first book that I published. It's a daily devotional book. It was for athletes, and it was written by 100 different college and pro athletes. I put their stories together. And so for me, man, that was kind of the first time writing and publishing a book and kind of getting into that space, and just been so fun. And I still, to this day, years later, still will speak to youth groups, churches, different organizations on that book.
Wow. That's awesome. So it sounds like you started doing building Thrive You, and then you got back on the team your senior year. And so you graduated, and I'm sure we're still doing things with Thrive You. I know it sounds like you went in the mortgage space. What kind of happened when you finished up in college?
Yeah, so I finished playing college football, coached high school football for about a year, and then I was in the mortgage industry for about the last 5 years, and worked for an amazing company, a truly amazing company. They every year they get voted in the top 10 for the top company cultures to work for in America. So I mean, we're talking about like a next level culture, right? Next level company. And when I was in this 9-to-5 job on the daily grind, I started doing kind of a side hustle. And my side hustle that I started doing was I would do speaking engagements. And so because of the first book that I wrote, I'd have opportunities to speak and share. And so what was crazy, it was kind of like I was living two lives. So I would be at my cubicle at work, slinging mortgage applications during the last few years, which, for a lot of your listeners know that the mortgage industry has been kind of crazy the last few years, right? With buying houses, interest rates, all that. And so it was really busy. But I would be in my cubicle, and then I would go fly to a speaking engagement and speak. And then I would come back and go right back to the cubicle, right? So it was like I was living these two lives. But what's cool is about kind of my side hustle story is for 4.5, almost 5 years, I did this side hustle, which was speaking and trying to add value to organizations. And at the end of that 5th year, I was actually able to walk away from my full-time day job, which I did really enjoy, but I knew I was called to something different. And I knew ultimately like speaking, consulting, writing books, being on podcasts like we're on right now, like this is what I'm called to do. And I knew I needed to step into that. And I think honestly, I had fear. I thought, you know what, I need this job to kind of be a crutch, right? I need this job over here and then my side hustle. And then, me and my family will be all right. But at a certain point, I had to make the jump. And it wasn't, some people could argue it probably wasn't the best time to take the jump. My wife stays home. I had a mortgage and we just had our first daughter at the time. And so it's like, from the world standpoint, it's like, man, what are you doing giving up this, comfortable mortgage job? But I think I just had the vision of, 30 years from now, what do I want to be doing? And I think when you start to ask yourself a question like that, it really makes things clear, because it causes you to look forward and say, well, if I don't want to do this current thing for the next 30, well, then what do I want to do? And so I think, man, just questions like that have started to guide me on the path that I'm on today.
Oh, I love that story. And guys, I've been very vocal on this. Like, I am a Christian. If you're not and you're listening to this, awesome. I want you here, and we're not going to talk about that the whole time. But I did hear this the other day on it was something from John Piper. He basically said, like, look at your life and ask yourself, is there anything you're doing that if the resurrection of Jesus didn't happen would be crazy? It's like, and for you, what I heard you say is like, to the world's eyes, you work for this amazing company. You're probably doing really well in the mortgage space, but you kind of have this like inkling to go out and speak to other organizations and ultimately impact people. And I know, you're not a pastor necessarily, but I've heard you talk about your faith. And I assume there was this just calling that you felt on your life to leverage the skills that you've been given and ultimately probably be uncomfortable for a little while. And maybe you still even are uncomfortable at times with that decision, but I take it it's gone pretty well so far.
Yeah, man. I think it's a good place to be, not, a good place to be where to your point, you're depending on God to provide. Right. And so I think just some context when I was making that decision of making the jump, and I would say this, I get the chance to speak, travel, write books. The question I get more than any other question is people come up to me and say, how do I quit my job? How do I pursue what I want to pursue? And so that's a humbling question to receive. And so the best advice that I can give is, before I quit, I spent months, researching, talking with people. I would say wise counsel was one of the most important things that I encountered. So before I quit, before I walked away, I interviewed essentially 12 people in my life. So mentors, people in my family, my spouse, full-time speakers, people that, because I knew I wanted to be a full-time speaker. I interviewed speakers. I interviewed people in the mortgage industry, and I interviewed people that ultimately knew me, and I knew that they would be honest with me. And so I was totally vulnerable and open with them. I said, hey, here are my financial goals. Here, all these X, Y, Z. I gave them everything and said, here's where I'm at with my job. Here's where I'm at with speaking. And Hampton, the really cool thing that was just super humbling, and I think just to your point, it was just so clear that God was marking this out for me, was 12 out of the 12 people essentially said, it's a no-brainer. You need to go for it. And, because like I was open to the point where if, 10 of them would have come back and said, Alex, I don't think this is wise. Stay with your job. Like I would have probably listened, because I did respect so many of these people. But when 12 out of 12 people said, you need to, like, if you do not pursue this now, you will always look back and wonder. And I think that's just for anyone listening that maybe you aspire to do something else with your career, or maybe you're just graduating, you're like, well, what's next? And I would just say, talk to people around you. Find the people that care about you, that you can trust them, and just ask them, hey, what do you see in me? What do you think? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? And that can be a hard conversation because it takes vulnerability. But man, like the things that you walk away from after a conversation like that are so awesome. And, here was another great encouragement I got during that time. One of my friends, her name's Kimberly Ernest, and she said, Alex, you desire to go to be a full-time speaker and an author. Like, that's your goal, right? I'm like, yep. She said, well, view the next year of you quitting as a 1-year test. She's like, at the end of 1 year, if you haven't made money, if you don't love it, guess what? You can go back and find any old job, right? She's like, so don't view this as like you quit your job and you're homeless on the street, right? View this as, hey, this is going to be a 1-year trial. And what's so cool, man, it's been well over a year, and it's just, I haven't looked back, and in some ways I probably should have made the jump even sooner.
That's great advice too. It's not like you're leaving a job forever. Like there's going to be opportunities to find other jobs there. I think another piece of advice I would give, and I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are, but you didn't just quit your job one day. It's you had something on the side that was kind of a side hustle, passion project, whatever you want to call it, that you really started in college. And so correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like for a few years you were building on this writing and speaking thing to where, it wasn't too much of a burden on top of your first job. Because for a lot of people, you can't just maybe graduate college if you're fortunate enough to go and then kind of do your own thing necessarily. But, it sounds like you were working for quite some time on the side with this, right?
That's great. That's a great word right there. And Dave Ramsey actually talks about this. He said, if you're desiring to make a leap or a jump of any kind, imagine it like this. There's a boat that you're in. Let's say that's your current job. And if you want to leap to this other boat, which is starting your own business or going for it, whatever that looks like for you, he's like, you need to be able to move from one boat to the other without making a splash. Like you can't, when you try to make that jump, you can't sink, you can't splash. It needs to be a good transition. And we talked about, with my kind of mentor at the time, we talked about that analogy. And she said, look, your boats are not only so close, but they're actually like, it's like they're docked together and they're actually causing friction. And she said, the longer you try to do these two things, it's actually going to be like, you're going to have negative returns. Like it's going to cause you to be stressed. It's not going to help you. And what's crazy about that advice, around that same time, I started getting these heart palpitations where I would just wake up in the morning and all of a sudden racing heartbeat. And I had never experienced that before in all my sports or anything. I wasn't even thinking about anything, but I would just wake up and have that. And I go to the doctor, they do an EKG, they look at everything, whatever. And they're like, everything looks great. But they're like, what are you doing for your work, for your job? And I said the 7 things I was trying to balance. And they were like, that's your problem. And I think at that moment, that started, making me think about, what do I want to do? How can I, because what the doctor said, they said, if you don't scale back, this is going to scale you back. And so I think for me, man, that was a big moment in my life to say, I can't do it all. I can't juggle everything. I mean, what are like the core things that I believe in that I want to pursue moving forward?
That's really interesting that you found that out. I mean, I think a lot of people just like work themselves to death, and I like that boat analogy too. It sounds like your boats really were tied together, and finally you made that jump. And so I guess where we can go now is the book to my top right, The Sale, which I read this weekend. Have lots of thoughts about that. It was awesome. How did you have that idea? Just tell me about that book. I mean, there's so much we could talk about there.
Man, I appreciate you saying that. So I co-authored it with Jon Gordon, and Jon is he's the number 5 keynote speaker in America. So he works with some of the top brands, organizations in the world. I've been on Jon's core leadership team for about 7 years, just learning from him. And so, yeah, when we wrote this book together, the really cool thing is that the message and theme about the book, The Sale, it's not just a sales book, as you know, it's bigger than that. It's about integrity. It's about, leading with integrity. It's about your character. And so what's really cool is my co-author and I have kind of built that relationship in the last 7 years where, I think he just turned 52. I was 29 when we started writing. And so I think there was this trust between us, even in the way that we work together. And so, man, to your point, just really briefly, I mean, the message of the book, the main character, it's a fable. So the main character named Matt, things are going well at work, but at home, not so much. And his wife, Kendra, pretty much says, look, like, I need you to provide. And his response is, as you read in the book, it's like, look, provide. I make more money in 1 month than the average person does in a year. Who are you telling to provide? That's like his stance. And so things at home are tough. And at work, he gets the chance to land this huge deal that he's been working for years. And as you know, in reading the book, he would actually make a $7 million commission check. And, Hampton, I don't know about you, but where I come from, that's a lot of money. I know you're a big timer, but for me, 7 million, that's pretty crazy. And so the problem is, as you know, in reading the book, to move forward with the sale, him and his team would have to lack integrity in some pretty major ways, and they'd have to turn a blind eye. And so without giving away the story to your listeners, there was this big decision that has to be made. Do they make the sale? Does he make all this money? Because then he could be financially free, spend more time with his family, or do they do the right thing? And so I think what's really cool, as you've read about in the book, the main character, Matt, he gets mentored by this mentor in his life named Randy. And he teaches him these laws and principles about integrity that end up shaping his decision. And so I'm not going to give it away. Your listeners have to go buy it and check it out. But man, just so honored that you took the time to read that book, because in a lot of ways, I think I was writing about myself as the main character, as Matt, someone who is trying to be successful, but in some ways losing sight of what really mattered.
Oh, I was wondering if you were going to say that. And even as I read the book, my wife asked me a question this week, and it took me a second to respond because I was stuck in the book, and I was like, trust me, I'm reading this book and it's going to help our marriage in the long run. I promise. Because just as someone that loves the work that I get to do and all of that, it's easy, like you said, with football, and maybe like you've done with work, to make that your identity. And then all of a sudden it's like, but I'm providing for our family. And then your spouse is like, I don't care. I need you to be here for me and our kids, which I don't have yet. I don't have kids yet, but that was so helpful for me to read. Just as you're seeing a guy crush it, but things are kind of falling apart at home. And I think that for a lot of listeners who are a bit younger, maybe not married yet, maybe not even dating somebody, what would it look like to, yes, take ownership of your life and work really, really hard, but also have boundaries too, and understand that you can do well at work and have a personal life and love your family well. I just think that was super helpful for me as someone young in my career that's already seeing tendencies of just getting overly excited about work, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but you never want that to take away from your family. So thank you for even a lesson that I got to learn there.
Dude, you mic dropped to what you just said, man. That's why we wrote the book. So I appreciate you saying that, and I'm excited for a lot of your listeners to check it out. But around the time I was getting those heart palpitations that I talked about earlier, man, I was answering email at 2 a.m. I was always on. I was never off. Right. And so I think it was just these unhealthy boundaries, to your point of, I would get a commission check, and rather than being grateful and thankful for that commission check, I would think, how do I double it next month? Or how do I, that was my thought. And it was a competitive sales environment where other people were thinking the same way. And so it wasn't until I kind of broke out of that mold, I'm like, wait a minute, there's actually more to life than just how much I can make or whatever. And I think I knew that. But to your point, when you get in the middle of it and you do enjoy the work that you do, it's easy to start rationalizing things, right? And so in the book that you just read, you see Matt, who if he moves forward with this sale, he'll be financially free. If he makes $7 million, he can solve his family problems. So he thinks, right? He can go be with his family, travel the country, do all these things. But when we're all faced with decisions that are not easy, it's easy to start rationalizing. Or if you've noticed this too, whenever you have a decision that maybe is not the best one, it's like you start rushing your decision making. You're like, well, I have to do it now, or maybe I'll never be able to do this again, right? And you start rationalizing these things, and pretty soon, I think a great example is when you look on the news. If you turned on ESPN right now, if you looked on the ticker at the bottom, there would probably be someone on, whether an athlete or a coach, that had a big integrity issue that either caused them to lose their job on the team, or embarrass themselves, or get fined, or whatever, or even way worse. And so I think my message is, when I speak to these organizations and teams and groups, it's like, look, you can be successful at work. We're called to be successful. We're called to be excellent. If you're going to go build tables, build the best tables you can, but don't do it at the cost of your own mental health, your family, all the things that you really care about. And I think that's the message of this book, is how can you align what you care about, what you feel called to, so that you can win at work and you can win at home. So that, when you look back on your career, it's like, you know what, I did that the right way. I feel good about the way in which I led my family and my team at work in that way.
Yeah. Super good. It makes me think of the part of the book, and you wrote it, so I'm going to guess you remember this, but one of the most impactful things that I read was talking about it's a lot easier to be 100% with something than 98%. Can you speak on that, if you know what I'm talking about?
No, that's great. And think about it. I mean, if you're 100% committed to something, a great example was, I got the chance to work out with Tim Tebow. And so he's an awesome dude. He was a role model for me growing up, and we're working out. It's late at night. It's me, him, and his dad. And we're working out at the Mizzou facility. And, essentially he's on this keto diet, right? He's really strict diet. He's so disciplined. and these people offered us these protein shakes. And I was like, sure, I'll have a protein shake. These are new team nutritionists. And he was, super respectful, but he was like, well, what brand do you have? And they said the name of the shake. And he was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I would never put those complex sugars in my body. And, it was like after this workout, he just, he said it in a nice way, but he was pretty much saying like, thank you, but no, thank you. And what I learned from that lesson, he didn't have dinner that night. Neither of us would probably bat an eye if we had a protein shake, right? But in that moment, he knew what he stood for. And I think so often in leadership, we get confused on like, what do I actually stand for? When you make a decision as a leader on the things that matter to you, the things that you do stand for, decision-making becomes so clear. And so to your point, if you're 100% committed to something, you already know what you stand for. You already know, hey, this is what I'm setting out to do and I'm going to do it. But if I'm 98% committed, if someone offers me something and I have to think through it each time, your chances of quitting or failing are just so much higher. And so I think, that's just, that hearing those stories again about just my commitment level to certain things are just impactful for me. Cause it's like, am I all in on these things that I say that I am,
First off, that's awesome. You got to work out with Tim Tebow. I'm sure he was throwing some weight around.
Dude, he made me look tiny. That dude is jacked. So yeah, he was throwing some weight around. That's for sure.
That's also like not shocking, that story. I just hear him talk about and hear other people talk about how disciplined he is and everything. But it makes me think about this other book behind me, Extreme Ownership. Jocko Willink talks about discipline breeds freedom. And so if you know what you stand for, know what your values are, if you're 100% in on whatever it is, in this case, the book Integrity, which is, I would encourage you to be 100% committed to integrity, then you have the freedom of not having to really make decisions. It's just what aligns with my values, done. And then you can live a much simpler life because you just understand what you really stand for. So that's been sticking with me the last couple of days. So thanks again for that one.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, even to your point on Jocko, I heard Jocko speak one time and he talked about, he's like, I don't buy new cars. He's like, I buy real estate. And so for him, that's just part of who he is, right? He's just saying like, I don't need to drive this flashy thing. That's just not my character. That's not who I am, but I do buy real estate. And why? So I can essentially build this passive income portfolio, right? And so I just think it is, whether it's real estate, whether it's your job, whatever it is for you, it's like, what are you focused on? And are you getting out the stuff that's in the way of that to align with where you're going in life?
Love that. We can learn a lot from Jocko. That's good. Talk about another guy that's super intense. I mean, that guy, there may not be anybody more intense than he is, at least from what I can see.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to lift weights with him. I know that.
No. Okay, can you tell me a little bit about Streamline Books?
Yeah, man. So I'm the co-founder with Will Severns of a company called Streamline Books. And what we do is we help people write and publish their book in a 16-week process. And so, man, for thought leaders like yourself or other people out there, it's like so many people have a message to share. So many people have expertise that they want to get out into the world, but they don't really know where to start. And so our team is a turnkey publishing service, just like you would buy turnkey real estate. We help people from ideation, going from zero to all the way to, cover design, typesetting, editing, all these things to where your book is published. And so for us, it's just such a joy to be able to help people take these ideas that they have and actually get them out into the world, man. So we have an awesome team, and it's super humbling. Tomorrow we'll have one of our quarterly summits as a leadership team. And so, for hours in a library or some kind of conference room, we'll just talk about, I'm sure we'll do some praying, kind of dreaming in the future, but also just talking about, hey, where are we at as a business? What are some of our blind spots? How can we get better? How can we even have a better client experience, man? So it's so fun. So yeah, if anyone's listening, I would love to give a discount to anyone who ends up reaching out because of your podcast. So we'll do a little discount code. We'll do Hampton or something. We'll make sure that people get a percentage off if they do move forward. But I just wanted to say that. But yeah, man, we love there's so much news in the world. We love telling people stories and helping them get their message out into the world.
That's super helpful. It makes me even think of Zoe Portis, somebody I had on here recently who said she wants to write a book one day. So I may need to tell her about you all, because I know a lot of people have like great stories they want to tell. They just have no idea like where to start or even how to write a book. So I think that's super cool. Now I have to ask, I mean, do you have another book in the works? I mean, I feel like you've got to be working on something.
Yeah, what's cool, man. I mean, obviously we get the chance to publish, almost a book a week at this point for Streamline Books, and
Wow.
sometimes more than that. But it just kind of depends on where that's at. But yeah, I actually have a list in my room of the next 7 books that I want to write. So it's kind of cool, just as kind of a goal for me, just to keep me accountable. That every day when I walk into my office, I see this list of, hey, here's where I'm going, and I actually put the year that I want to write the book as well, and usually the month. So I think just for me,
Wow.
it's like it helps define that of, hey, this is this book I want to write about, and here's the topic, here's what I want to address. Because then what's cool, as once you start doing speaking engagements, getting out there, a lot of people will then bring you in to speak on a certain book, right? So, right now I'm doing a lot of speaking engagements all over the country on the sale about building trust, doing team building type workshops. But if you write a book on another topic, let's say on leadership, right? Someone might bring you in and say, hey, we're doing a leadership workshop, come speak on leadership. And so yeah, that's the benefit to anyone who's listening. If you do want to write a book at some point, our website is actually, it's not writemybooks.com, it's writemybooks.com, because we know most people, they don't just have one book, they have multiple books in them.
Wow. Okay. I'm learning a ton right here. This is awesome. Um, well, I mean, I just really appreciate you joining me, and I'm learning a ton from you right now. I can't even wait to see all the amazing things that you do. And I guess unless there's anything else you wanted to talk about, I thought it would be cool to hear, if I'm being honest, most people I'm connected to on LinkedIn, I feel like all those people know who Jon Gordon is, but a lot of people my age that, may
Right.
have just been a buddy or something like that, who are more from our generation that might not just crush books all the time, might not know a ton about him. So can you
Yeah.
just tell us a little bit about like y'all's relationship and maybe some of the things you've learned from him?
Yeah, that's a great point, man. So when I was on the football team at Mizzou, Jon Gordon actually spoke at Mizzou. And so he spoke, just gave a really encouraging message. And I honestly just connected with him and said, look, like, I want to do the type of work that you're doing. Like, I'm willing to do whatever that looks like. And so he's like, well, are you willing to work for free? And I'm like, sure. And so I started managing his LinkedIn account. I started doing all these things, doing outbound sales. This is 7 years ago, right? And so he played lacrosse at Cornell, and then now he's the author of almost 30 books, and many of them are bestsellers. And so I've had the chance to just learn from him, but also I was willing to jump in and say, hey, like, I'm willing to work for free to learn. And so I think a lot of people ask, like, hey, Alex, how did you get to write a book with Jon Gordon, who's kind of like a celebrity in his space, And it's like, well, for one, I just had to jump in 7 years ago and start adding value, and I built that trust with him. Number two, as humbling as those comments are that people say, it's like, I remember going to Barnes and Noble a few years ago, and I remember grabbing like 7 of Jon Gordon's books, and I put them all on a table. And I remember I had headphones in. People were probably looking at me like I was crazy. But I remember looking at the introduction of his books, the way he started paragraphs, all these different things. And I tried to like learn, hey, how is he doing it? And so when we wrote the sale together, I wanted to keep as close to I could to his voice, to my voice. And so I think that, it's like, what are you doing in the unseen hours? What are you doing to prepare, whether it's writing a book or it's getting ready for a marathon or whatever? What will you do to, almost put higher standards on yourself than anyone else would put on you? Because I think everyone talks about doing like the required work, like, hey, you have to show up and do this, but it's like, what about the unrequired things? What about the going above and beyond? And I think, and that's what I've learned from him is, don't keep inside of you what you feel like you need to share. And I think we're called to share, whether that's an encouragement, whether that's someone writing a book, whether that's someone being on a podcast. It's like, to me, I think we're called to have a stewardship responsibility. We have that. And so to have gifts, to have skills and abilities, and just to hide them and not utilize them, I feel like at the end of your life, you're going to have a lot of regrets. And so my hope is that, and I think for you too, man, like, I hope for both of us, we can use these gifts that we've been given to the best of our ability. So at the end of our life, it's like, man, I'm on empty, because I've done them all. I've run the race, and I've done it ultimately, for people like faith like us, is for the glory of God. But I think there's so many things that translate into the business world and to what you're doing when you think about, hey, how can I share my message that might only impact one person? But I think it's this one person at a time mentality that I'm trying to focus on. And that's what Jon Gordon has taught me in that way.
That's something else. I mean, I wish there was a picture of you sitting in the bookstore with all of his books. I mean, guys, that's what it takes, the unseen work. And notice, Guys, Alex worked for free for Jon. I had a guest, Ange Boudoir, that's his last name, another fun last name, a couple weeks ago. And he said, find the people that you want to be like, find the people you want to be like, and do whatever it takes to just be around them. If you have to mop the floor of their office, if you really are passionate about something, and there is somebody like a Jon Gordon, do what you can to be around them. And maybe that's working for free, but if you want it that bad, you'll do it. So that's just a super inspiring story.
Bro, retweet that, man. That's so true. It's like, okay, what do you want to do when you graduate? Do you want to go work a normal job and not really gain many skills for 10 years and then look up and say, what am I doing? Or would you say, you know what, I'm willing to make less out of the gate, but I'm going to go just job shadow someone. I'm going to go just, like you said, for free, try to add value. And you never know what that will turn into. So that's some awesome advice, man. I'm really excited to see, like, in 10, 15 years what you're going to be doing. I'm going to be reading your book. I know that. So
I don't know, man. I know one of your guys has been reaching out to me about writing a book with you all. I don't know what I'll write yet. So if y'all can give me the idea and then do the whole thing for me and put my name on it, I'll do that.
Well, hey, we have a team of over 35 ghostwriters that'll help you do that. So yeah, Nathan has been awesome to set this up, and yeah, dude, he'll be back in your DMs. Don't worry.
All right. Well, Nathan, if you're listening to this, you're the man. Thank you for setting this up. And everyone, I know you've learned a ton from Alex today. I will put links and everything to follow him below. Read The Sale. I promise you, especially, really anyone, but if you're young in your career, it's going to help you really think about what's important to you and make sure that you live a life of integrity. So, Alex, I didn't tell you this before, but I do like to end these podcasts with you telling people to wake up and lead. So I like to say it's time for you and me, and then you say to wake up and lead. Can we do that?
Let's do it.
All right, sweet. It's time for you and me
to wake up and lead, baby. Let's go.
Boom. Let's go.